The winter cold had teeth in Akron, Ohio. At 7:28 p.m. on Tuesday, January 14th, 2025, Marcus Thompson heard the dispatcher's voice crackle through his headset with the kind of urgency that meant someone was running out of time. Structure fire. 4758 Willow Creek Lane. Elderly female trapped inside. Neighbors reporting flames visible from street. Marcus was driving engine 7, 38 years old, 12 years with Akron Fire Department. Former Army medic who'd pulled wounded soldiers from burning vehicles in Fallujah and learned that the difference between saving a life and losing one often came down to seconds. He knew how to count seconds. The engine roared through intersections, lights flashing, siren cutting through the January darkness. His crew was suited up before they hit the third block. Turnout gear, masks ready, SCBA tanks checked. Marcus drove with his left hand and pulled on his gloves with his right. 4 minutes from dispatch to arrival. Not bad, but not good enough if someone was inside. The house at 4758 Willow Creek Lane was a single-story ranch. Modest, well-maintained, the kind of place where someone had lived for decades and taken care of every detail. White siding, black shutters, a small front porch with a swing that moved slightly in the wind. Except now, smoke poured from the kitchen window in thick black columns that rose into the night sky like funeral pyres. Marcus killed the engine. His crew was out before the truck stopped moving. Captain Sarah Rodriguez was already assessing the scene. Battalion Chief Morrison pulled up in his SUV. Neighbors stood on the sidewalk in coats thrown over pajamas. Watching, waiting, hoping. An elderly woman in a blue bathrobe grabbed Marcus's arm as he passed. "She's still in there. Dorothy, I called 911, but she didn't come out." "Oh God, she didn't come out. How old? 82. She lives with her son, but he's not home. I saw him leave an hour ago. She's alone in there." Marcus looked at the house. Flames visible through the kitchen window now. Orange and hungry. Smoke pouring from the eaves. The roof was old. Asphalt shingles. Wooden frame underneath. He'd seen roofs like this collapse before. Rodriguez was beside him. Coordinating entry. Front door or side front. Fastest route to living areas. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before that roof goes. In and out, Thompson." "Fast." Marcus nodded, pulled his mask into place, checked his regulator. His partner, Jake Miller, a 26-year-old rookie with good instincts and steady hands, was right behind him. They moved to the front porch. The door was closed. Marcus tried the handle. Locked. Not unusual. People lock their doors, but something about it felt wrong. The neighbor said Dorothy hadn't come out. If she'd smelled smoke, she would have run for the nearest exit. The front door was 15 feet from the living room. Why wouldn't she have unlocked it and escaped? No time to think about it. Marcus stepped back, lifted his right leg, drove his boot into the door just below the handle with all the force 12 years of firefighting and 100 training drills had taught him. The door frame splintered. The door swung inward, and Marcus saw something that made his blood go cold. The deadbolt was engaged, not just locked with the handle lock. The deadbolt, the kind that required a key from the inside to open. And the key wasn't there. There was a small brass hook on the wall beside the door. The kind of hook where you kept your keys so you always knew where they were. Marcus had one just like it in his own house. The hook was empty. Marcus looked at Jake, said nothing. But Jake saw it too. The deadbolt engaged, the missing key, the understanding that someone had locked this door from the outside. Someone had locked an 82-year-old woman inside a burning house. "Move." Rodriguez's voice in his headset. Urgent. The roof was groaning, timbers shifting. They had 30 seconds, maybe less. Marcus pushed through the doorway. Smoke hit him like a wall, thick, black, hot enough to sear his lungs even through the mask. He dropped low. Heat rose, cooler air near the floor. Basic physics that saved lives. The living room was a maze of furniture. Couch, coffee table, recliner, all of it backlit by flames coming from the kitchen. The fire had started there and was spreading fast. Drywall doesn't burn, but everything else does. Curtains, carpet, furniture, all of it fuel. Dorothy. He called her name. No answer. Swept the room with his flashlight. Nothing. Moved toward the hallway. Bedroom, probably. She might have tried to escape through a window, or collapsed trying. Then he saw her, near the front door, on the floor, face down. She'd made it this far, had probably smelled the smoke, had probably grabbed her walker and moved as fast as an 82-year-old woman could move toward the exit, had probably leave her hand for the handle and pulled and twisted and realized with mounting horror that the door wouldn't open, that the deadbolt was engaged, that the key was gone, that her son had locked her inside. Marcus dropped to his knees, rolled her onto her back. She was small, frail, gray hair, burn marks on both hands where she'd touched something hot, probably tried to fight the fire before giving up and running. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, checking for a pulse. There. Faint, thready, but there. Got her. Unconscious, moving to exit. Jake cleared a path, kicked the coffee table aside. Marcus lifted Dorothy in a fireman's carry. She weighed maybe 90 pounds, lighter than the gear he was wearing. He moved fast, through the living room, through the doorway, onto the front porch. Behind him he heard the sound every firefighter dreads. A crack, sharp and final, the sound of wood giving way. The roof collapsed 8 seconds after Marcus cleared the threshold. The entire structure came down in a shower of sparks and flame and debris. The living room where he'd just been standing was now buried under burning timbers and shingles and insulation. 8 seconds. If he'd been slower, if he'd hesitated, if he'd second-guessed the locked door or wasted time wondering why it was locked instead of just moving, 8 seconds and he and Dorothy would both be dead. Marcus laid Dorothy on the lawn, away from the heat, away from the smoke. Paramedics were already there. Melissa Grant and Tom Rodriguez. They'd worked with Marcus 100 times, knew what to do without being told. Oxygen mask, IV line, vitals, pulse 62, BP 90 over 60, second-degree burns both hands, smoke inhalation severe. We need to transport now. Marcus stepped back, let them work, pulled off his mask, breathed the cold January air and tasted ash and smoke and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Captain Rodriguez was beside him. You got her out with seconds to spare. Hell of a job, Thompson. Marcus didn't respond. He was staring at the house, at the flames consuming what was left of the structure, at the neighbors watching from the sidewalk, at the empty driveway where Dorothy's son's car should have been. Cap, yeah. That door was deadbolted from the outside. The key was missing from the inside. Someone locked her in. Rodriguez's expression changed, went from relief to something harder. Colder. You sure I'm sure? Rodriguez pulled out her radio, switched to a different channel. Dispatch, this is Captain Rodriguez, Engine 7. We need a fire investigator at 4758 Willow Creek Lane immediately. Possible arson, possible attempted homicide. Contact Akron PD and have them send a detective. The paramedics loaded Dorothy into the ambulance. Lights and sirens. Racing toward Mercy General Hospital. Marcus watched them go. Then he walked back to the engine, pulled off his turnout coat, sat on the bumper. His hands were shaking. He'd pulled people out of fires before. Dozens of times. Car wrecks, collapsed buildings, structure fires just like this one. It was his job, what he'd trained for, what he was good at. But this was different. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a space heater left too close to curtains or a candle knocked over by a cat. This was deliberate. Someone had locked an 82-year-old woman in her house and started a fire. And Marcus had a pretty good idea who. The fire investigator arrived 40 minutes later. Captain Sarah Rodriguez was still there. So was Battalion Chief Morrison. So was Marcus. He'd stayed even though his shift had ended 20 minutes ago. He needed to know, needed to confirm what he'd seen. The investigator's name was David Chen, 52 years old, 28 years with the Akron Fire Department. He'd investigated more than 1,000 fires, could tell you the difference between accidental ignition and deliberate arson by looking at burn patterns and accelerant residue and the way flames traveled through a structure. He spent 90 minutes in what was left of the house, taking photographs, collecting samples, making notes on a tablet that somehow survived the soot and ash. When he came out, his expression was grim. Arson, no question. Captain Rodriguez crossed her arms. How sure? 100%. Found the ignition point. Kitchen, space heater. Brand new. Still had the price tag on it. Lasco model 754-200. Purchased today based on the receipt I found in the kitchen trash. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Chen continued. Space heater was positioned against the curtains, plugged into an electrical timer, the kind you use for lamps when you're on vacation. Timer was set for 7:15 p.m. I found cooking oil poured on the floor. Accelerant. Made sure the fire spread fast once it started. What about the door? Marcus asked. Chen looked at him. You're the one who found the deadbolt engaged. Yeah. From the outside. Key missing from the inside hook. Chen nodded. I photographed that. Door's severely damaged from the collapse, but the deadbolt mechanism is still intact. It was definitely engaged when you kicked it in. And I found this. He held up an evidence bag. Inside was a small brass hook, the one from beside the door. No key on it. But there's a witness who says there's always a key on that hook. Neighbor lady, Mrs. Chen. No relation. She says Dorothy Sullivan always kept her house key right there. Everyone on the street knew it. So someone took the key, Marcus said, locked the deadbolt from the outside, started a timer that would ignite the heater at 7:15, and left. That's my assessment, Chen said. This was planned, deliberate. Whoever did this wanted Dorothy Sullivan dead and wanted it to look like an accident. Captain Rodriguez pulled out her phone. I'm calling Detective Shapiro. She needs to hear this. Marcus stood there in the cold, staring at the ruins of 4758 Willow Creek Lane, thinking about an 82-year-old woman who'd smelled smoke and grabbed her walker and tried to escape and found the door locked, who'd pulled the handle and twisted and realized she was trapped, who'd probably screamed for help that no one heard, who'd collapsed near the door and would have died there if Marcus had been 30 seconds slower. He pulled out his phone, looked at the time, 9:47 p.m. Then he made a decision. He was going to the hospital. He was going to check on Dorothy Sullivan. And he was going to make damn sure whoever did this didn't get a second chance. Mercy General Hospital's intensive care unit was on the 3rd floor. Marcus arrived at 6:15 a.m. Wednesday morning, January 15th. He hadn't slept, had gone home after the fire, showered twice trying to get the smell of smoke out of his hair. Failed, laid in bed staring at the ceiling thinking about locked doors and missing keys and 82-year-old women who trusted the wrong people. At 5 a.m. he'd given up on sleep and driven to the hospital. The ICU waiting room was empty except for a janitor mopping the floor. The lights were harsh, fluorescent, the kind that made everyone look sick even when they weren't. Marcus walked to the nurse's station. A woman in scrubs looked up. Name tag said Patricia Gomez. Can I help you? I'm Marcus Thompson, firefighter. I pulled Dorothy Sullivan out of the house fire last night. Wanted to check on her condition. Patricia's expression softened. You're the one who saved her. Is she okay? Patricia glanced at her computer. Stable. Burns on both hands. 2nd degree. Smoke inhalation. We've got her on oxygen and fluids, doctor. Harrison examined her around 4 a.m. Said she's remarkably healthy for 82. Strong vitals. Good lung capacity considering the smoke exposure. Can I see her? Patricia hesitated. Family only during ICU hours. Are you? I'm not family, but I need to know she's safe. Something in his voice must have convinced her, because Patricia stood up and walked around the desk. Room 314, she's sedated but might wake up soon. I'll give you 5 minutes. Thank you. Marcus walked down the hall, counted doors, 3rd one on the left, room 314. He pushed the door open quietly. Dorothy Sullivan lay in the hospital bed looking impossibly small. White sheets pulled up to her chest, both hands wrapped in gauze. IV lines running into her left arm. Oxygen cannula in her nose. Heart monitor beeping steady and reassuring. Her face was pale, thin, the kind of thinness that came from not eating enough, from stress, from months of slow decline that nobody noticed or nobody cared enough to stop. Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed, sat down. He didn't know what to say, didn't know if she could even hear him, but he spoke anyway. Mrs. Sullivan, my name is Marcus Thompson. I'm the firefighter who pulled you out last night. I just wanted you to know you're safe. You're in the hospital. You're going to be okay. No response, just the steady beep of the heart monitor. Marcus looked at her bandaged hands, at the burns that would scar, at the woman who'd spent 82 years on this earth doing whatever it was she'd done, raising a son, living a life, trusting people. and someone had repaid that trust by locking her in a burning house. He sat there for 20 minutes, not speaking, just being present, making sure she wasn't alone. Then her eyes opened, slowly, unfocused at first, blinking against the light. She turned her head slightly, saw Marcus sitting there, a stranger in a hospital room. Her voice when she spoke was rough, damaged from smoke, but clear enough. "You saved me." It wasn't a question, it was a statement, certain. Marcus leaned forward. "Yes, ma'am, I did." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. They ran down the sides of her face, soaked into the pillow. "Thank you." 2 words, simple, but carrying the weight of a life saved, of a future that almost didn't exist. Marcus nodded. "You're welcome, Mrs. Sullivan, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully." Dorothy waited. "The door to your house? The front door?" It was locked when I arrived. The deadbolt was engaged from the outside. The key that's usually on the hook beside the door was missing. "Can you tell me what happened?" Dorothy closed her eyes. Fresh tears came. When she opened them again, her voice was steadier, like she'd been waiting for someone to ask, like she'd been preparing this answer since she woke up. "I heard the deadbolt click. I thought Robert was just locking up before he left for the store. I didn't think anything of it until I smelled the smoke." Robert, her son. Marcus kept his voice gentle, calm, like he was talking to a frightened child instead of an elderly woman who just survived attempted murder. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." Dorothy took a breath, coughed slightly. The oxygen helped. "My husband Thomas died 8 months ago, May of last year. Heart attack. We'd been married 58 years. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you." She paused. "Robert said I shouldn't live alone, that the house we'd owned for 40 years was too big for just me, that I should sell it and move in with him. He'd take care of me. Did you want to move?" Dorothy's laugh was bitter. "Broken. No, but he was insistent. Said it made sense financially, that he had room, that I'd be safer with him than alone." "When did you move in March?" "Last year, about 10 months ago." "And how was it at first?" "Fine. For the first few months it was fine." Robert seemed genuinely caring. "He cooked meals, made sure I took my medications. We watched television together. I thought maybe this was good. Maybe he really did want to help." "When did things change?" Dorothy looked at the ceiling, as if the answer was written there in the acoustic tiles. "September, he started asking about money, about my finances. How much did Dad leave me when he died? How much was the house worth? Did I have life insurance? Who was the beneficiary? What did you tell him? That Thomas had been careful? That we'd saved? That there was money in accounts, in a life insurance policy, in the house sale?" But I didn't give him exact numbers. It felt wrong, like he was counting my assets while I was still alive. "Did he push?" "Yes. He convinced me to give him power of attorney. Said it was for convenience, in case something happened to me, so he could manage things, help pay bills." Dorothy's voice cracked. "I signed the papers. I trusted him. He's my son." Marcus felt anger building in his chest, cold and controlled. The kind of anger that didn't explode, that burned steady and hot and didn't go out. "What happened after you gave him power of attorney?" "The house got darker. Robert started closing all the curtains, all the time, even during the day. He said it saved on heating costs, but it felt like he was hiding me, hiding us." "Did anyone visit?" "The neighbors tried. Patricia Chen from down the street. She'd come over in October, wanted to talk, see how I was doing. But Robert hovered, stood right there while we talked. I could feel him listening. And I got scared. Scared of your own son." Dorothy nodded. "I know how that sounds. But yes, I started feeling like a prisoner instead of a guest." "Did you try to leave?" "Where would I go? I'd sold my house. My friends from church were all elderly like me. I had no family except Robert. And every time I thought about saying something, I'd think maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was being ungrateful. Maybe this was normal, and I was just old and confused." "You're not confused, Mrs. Sullivan, and you're not overreacting." Dorothy looked at him. Really looked. This man who'd crawled through fire to save her. This stranger who was showing her more care than her own son had in months. "What happened last night?" Marcus asked. "Walk me through it." Dorothy's hands trembled beneath the gauze. "Robert came home around 6:30. He'd been gone most of the day, said he had errands. He seemed nervous, kept checking his phone. Then he said he needed to go to Home Depot. Light bulbs, would be back in an hour. Did he usually go to the store that late? Numb? But I didn't question it. He grabbed his jacket, his keys. I heard him walk to the front door. Then I heard the deadbolt click. From the inside or outside, outside. Dorothy's voice was certain, absolutely certain. I know that sound, that specific click. It's different when you lock it from inside versus outside. He locked it from outside. And he took the key with him, the one that's always on the hook. What did you do? I thought it was strange, but not alarming, not yet. I was watching the news. Then maybe 15 minutes later, I smelled something burning. Marcus leaned forward. What did you smell? Smoke. And something chemical, like plastic melting. I got up. I have my walker. I can move around fine. I'm not bedridden or helpless. The anger in her voice was good, meant she still had fight left. I went to the kitchen, and I saw flames, big flames, orange and bright, and already spreading up the curtains. There was a space heater I'd never seen before, right against the wall, against the fabric. Did you try to put out the fire? I tried. Dorothy's voice broke. I grabbed a dish towel, tried to smother it, but it was too big already, and the floor was slippery. There was oil everywhere. I slipped, fell, burned my hands on something hot. That's when she'd gotten the burns. Trying to fight a fire her son had set. What did you do then? I got my walker, moved as fast as I could to the front door. I pulled the handle, I twisted it, but it wouldn't open. The deadbolt was locked. And the key wasn't there. Dorothy was crying now, full sobs that shook her frail frame. I pulled, and it wouldn't open, and I could hear the fire getting louder, and the smoke was so thick and I couldn't breathe, and I thought I was going to die. I thought my son had locked me in, and I was going to die. Marcus reached out, put his hand over hers carefully, mindful of the burns. But you didn't die. You called 911. You survived. You're here. I don't remember calling. I just remember collapsing. Everything went black. You called. The dispatcher has the recording. You gave your address. You said there was a fire. You saved yourself, Mrs. Sullivan. You fought. Dorothy looked at their hands, his large and scarred from years of firefighting, hers small and wrapped in gauze. Why would he do this? She whispered. Why would my own son try to kill me? Marcus knew the answer, had seen it 100 times in different forms, but he let Dorothy figure it out herself. Money, she said, her voice hollow. He's been so stressed about money for months. He asked me about my life insurance in September, wanted to know how much it was worth, who the beneficiary was. She looked at Marcus with eyes that had aged a decade in one night. I thought he was planning ahead, being responsible. I'm such a fool. You're not a fool, Marcus said firmly, his voice hard. Certain. You're his mother. You trusted him. That's not foolish. That's love. And he exploited that love for money. That makes him a monster, not you a fool. Dorothy closed her eyes, exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that came from trauma and smoke damage and the realization that the person you'd raised had tried to kill you. What happens now? She asked. Now you rest. Now you heal. And now I make sure your son doesn't get anywhere near you. How can you do that? You're a firefighter. You saved my life. You don't owe me anything else. Marcus stood, looked down at this woman who'd survived something no one should have to survive. Mrs. Sullivan, I didn't just pull you out of that fire to let someone put you right back in danger. Your son hasn't been arrested yet. The police are building their case. But he's still out there. And if he realizes you survived, if he realizes you can testify that he locked you in, you're not safe. What can I do? Dorothy's voice was small, helpless. I'm in a hospital bed. I can't protect myself. Marcus reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone. He didn't dial. Not yet. Just held it, looking at Dorothy with the same intensity he had had when he told his battalion chief he was going into that burning house, whether he was ordered to or not. You don't have to protect yourself. That's what I came here to tell you. I'm calling my brothers, all of them. And starting today, you're not going to be alone for one single second until your son is behind bars. Dorothy didn't understand, not yet. But Marcus Thompson understood exactly what he was about to set in motion. He stepped into the hallway. Let the ICU door close softly. The corridor was quiet. 6:30 a.m., nurses changing shifts, a doctor checking charts. Everything looked normal. Marcus pulled up a contact on his phone. Priest. The line rang twice. Reaper. The voice on the other end was gravelly, rough from decades of cigarettes and road dust, but warm. Victor Dalton, known to everyone as Priest, 61 years old, president of the Toledo Hells Angels chapter. Former firefighter himself, 30 years running into burning buildings before he ever joined the club. A man who understood exactly what it meant when a brother called before sunrise. Priest, it's Marcus. I need every brother within 100 miles at Mercy General Hospital in Akron. Now there was a pause. Not hesitation, calculation. Priest didn't waste words on questions he didn't need answered yet. What's going on? Marcus kept his voice low, controlled, but the fury beneath it was unmistakable. 72 hours ago, I pulled an 82-year-old woman out of a house fire. Her son locked her inside from the outside and started the fire deliberately. Fire investigator confirmed arson. He's trying to collect on a $200,000 life insurance policy. Police are building a case, but he's not arrested yet. She's in ICU, and I think she's still in danger. How long was Marcus quiet? Then we're not waiting for the cops to take their time on this one. Say no more. Priest's voice was steel. Absolute. We're coming. The line went silent. That was it. No questions about proof. No concerns about legal complications. No debate about whether this was their business. Just instant commitment, because that's what a brotherhood meant. Marcus slipped his phone back into his pocket, walked back into Dorothy's room. She looked up at him, expression uncertain, worried. What happens now? She asked. Marcus sat down, smiled. This time it was real. Now, Mrs. Sullivan, you rest, you heal, and you let us handle the rest. By Thursday afternoon, barely 18 hours after Marcus made that phone call, the third floor of Mercy General Hospital looked like the parking lot of a rally. Victor Dalton arrived first, driving his black 2011 Harley-Davidson Street Glide, the Hells Angels Toledo patch visible on the back of his leather vest. He was broad-shouldered with a gray beard down to his chest. Wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of calm, steady presence that came from 30 years of running into burning buildings before he'd ever joined the club. He walked into the ICU waiting area like he owned it, not arrogant, just certain. Went straight to Marcus. Where is she? Room 314, stable. Burns on her hands and arms, smoke inhalation. But she'll survive. The problem is her son, Robert Sullivan. He's out there. He knows she's alive. And the police haven't moved on him yet. Priest nodded once. Then we move first. Marcus pulled out a folded paper from his jacket. First shift schedule. Already done. Starts in 20 minutes. Bones and wire taking first rotation. Priest smiled, a rare, genuine smile. That's why you're Reaper. You think 3 steps ahead. They came in waves, not all at once. That would have been chaos. Would have drawn too much attention. Would have violated every principle of tactical coordination that men like Priest and Marcus had learned in decades of firefighting and military service. Instead, they arrived in calculated intervals. First wave, 6 a.m. Thursday, 23 motorcycles from Toledo chapter, parking in perfect formation. 2 by 2, engines synchronized, then silent. Second wave, 7:15 a.m. 41 from Akron chapter. They knew the city, knew the hospital, knew which entrances had cameras. Third wave, 8:30 a.m. 37 from Cleveland, plus 49 from smaller chapters across northeastern Ohio who'd gotten the call and dropped everything to be there. By 9 a.m., 150 motorcycles lined the parking lot in military precision. 150 men in leather vests bearing the same insignia stood in the January cold, breath misting, waiting. Hospital security noticed. But when Gerald Matthews, known to the club as Bones, walked into the security office and handed the chief a letter signed by both the Akron Fire Department battalion chief and the lead detective on Dorothy Sullivan's arson case, explaining that the Hells Angels were providing voluntary civilian protection for a vulnerable witness. And when Bones quietly mentioned that he himself had 26 years with Akron PD and still had the commissioner's personal cell number, security decided this was above their pay grade and called administration. Administration decided to allow it, provisionally, with conditions. By 10 a.m., the hospital corridors looked like something that shouldn't have been possible. Two brothers stood outside room 314, arms crossed, scanning every person who walked past. Gerald Bones Matthews, 58, retired detective, 26 years homicide. He'd seen every variation of human cruelty the city could produce, knew how to read people, knew when someone was lying, knew when danger was approaching. Jason Wirepark, 38, former IRS investigator, financial crimes. He could follow money trails through offshore accounts and shell companies and track down assets people thought they'd hidden. They stood perfectly still, professional, alert. Down the hallway near the elevators, two more brothers in plain clothes sat reading magazines they weren't actually reading. Early warning system. Anyone suspicious got flagged before they reached Dorothy's door. In the parking lot, a rotating crew of 10 maintained what priests called perimeter awareness, not blocking exits, not intimidating visitors, just present, watching, making sure Robert Sullivan couldn't approach the building without being seen. The brothers were quieter than most visitors. They didn't smoke near the entrances. Hospital policy. They didn't block hallways. When a nurse needed pass, they stepped aside immediately. When a doctor asked them to lower their voices, they did. They brought Dorothy flowers, real ones from a florist, not gas station carnations. Patricia Gomez, the head nurse who'd let Marcus into Dorothy's room at 6 a.m., found herself grudgingly impressed. On Thursday afternoon, she stopped by room 314 during her rounds and found Sarah Murphy, 44 paramedic with Cleveland EMS, sitting beside Dorothy's bed, helping her with a crossword puzzle. Six-letter word for protector, Dorothy read aloud. Shields, Sarah suggested gently. Dorothy smiled. Filled in the letters. That fits. Patricia cleared her throat. Mrs. Sullivan, how are you feeling today? Dorothy looked up, and her expression was something Patricia hadn't seen in 3 days of caring for her. Peaceful, safe, Dorothy said simply. For the first time since my husband passed away, I feel safe. Patricia checked vitals, made notes. As she left, she glanced at Bones and Wire standing guard outside and thought maybe this world isn't quite as broken as I thought. Dorothy met Priest an hour later. Marcus brought him into her room, this towering bearded biker in leather and denim. Dorothy flinched slightly. Instinct. Priest saw it. He always did. People looked at him and saw danger, saw violence, saw everything the media told them to see. He pulled a chair close to her bed, sat down slowly, took off his sunglasses. His eyes were kind, tired but kind. Mrs. Sullivan, he said, voice gentle, almost grandfatherly. My name is Victor. People call me Priest. I'm president of the Hells Angels Toledo chapter. Marcus here is one of my brothers. He told me what happened to you, what your son did. Dorothy looked at Marcus, then back at Priest. I appreciate you coming, but I don't understand. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Priest leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. Ma'am, I'm 61 years old. My mother is 84. She lives in a care home in Toledo. And every Sunday I visit her. I bring her flowers. I sit with her. I make sure she's okay. Because she's my mother. She raised me. She fed me. She loved me even when I didn't deserve it. He paused, jaw tightening. If someone did to her what your son did to you, if someone locked her in a room and started a fire to collect insurance money, I would hope somebody would step up to protect her. Priest's voice was steady. Certain. You're somebody's mother. That makes you worth protecting. Dorothy's hand trembled as she reached out. Priest took it carefully, mindful of the bandages. Thank you, she whispered. You don't have to thank us, ma'am. You just have to let us do our job. Starting right now, there will be 2 members of our club outside your door 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until your son is arrested and you're safe. He will not get near you. Do you understand? Dorothy nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. Priest stood, placed his sunglasses back on. Nodded to Marcus. Get me a schedule. 8-hour rotations. Fresh eyes every shift. Nobody gets tired. Nobody gets sloppy. Already done, Marcus said, pulling the folded paper from his jacket again. Priest smiled. That's why you're Reaper. While the brothers maintained the hospital shield, Wire and Bones were dismantling Robert Sullivan's lies piece by piece. Wire had spent Thursday morning pulling phone records, bank statements, credit reports, cross-referencing, timestamps, building a timeline. By noon, he had enough to make him physically sick. He sat in the hospital cafeteria with Marcus Priest and Bones. Laptop open, printouts spread across the table. Robert Sullivan, as Drowning Wire said without preamble. Total debt $114,000. Mortgage underwater by $40,000. Credit cards maxed at $38,000 across 5 different cards. Personal loan from a payday lender at 24% interest, $15,000. Car loan, $12,000. Income, Bones asked. Sporadic IT consulting work. Last 12 months averaged $1,400 a month. His minimum monthly expenses are $2,550. He's been in the red for over a year. Priest leaned back, arms crossed. So where'd he get money to keep the lights on? Wire turned the laptop screen toward them. Dorothy's accounts. After her husband Thomas passed away 8 months ago, Robert convinced her to give him power of attorney. Said it was for convenience, to help her manage things. How much did Thomas leave her? Dorothy sold their house for $285,000. That money should have been in trust for her care and eventual estate. How much is left? $85,000. Bones whistled low. He burned through $200,000 in 8 months, paid off his debts temporarily, kept his house from foreclosure, bought himself time. But it ran out. By December, he was desperate again. Wire pulled up another document, and here's the kicker. September 2024. 6 months ago, Robert took out a life insurance policy on Dorothy, American Heritage Life. $200,000 payout. Beneficiary Robert Sullivan. Premium $240 a month. Marcus felt his hands curl into fists. Most life insurance policies have a 2-year contestability period. Wire continued. If the insured dies within 2 years of the policy being taken out, the company investigates heavily. 6 months in, that's deep in the red zone. Any death would trigger an investigation. So he had to make it look like an accident, Marcus said. Exactly. House fire, elderly woman, space heater malfunction. Tragic but believable. He collects $200,000 plus the remaining $85,000 from her accounts, plus her estate. Total over $300,000. Enough to clear his debts and start over. Priest's expression was stone. Except she survived. Wire pulled up one more file. There's something else. March 2020. Robert's wife, Elena Sullivan, died in a car accident. Single vehicle crash. She drove off a bridge in icy conditions. Ruled accidental. Payout $164,000. The table went silent. Are you saying Bones started? I'm not saying anything, Wire said carefully. I'm just noting that Robert Sullivan has now been the beneficiary of 2 very large life insurance claims within 5 years. The first was investigated and closed as accidental. But given what we know about this case, it might be worth reopening that file. Marcus stood. When are they arresting him? Detective handling the case says they're finalizing the warrant today, Bones said. Should have him in custody by tonight. Tomorrow morning latest. Problem is, Priest said Robert knows something's wrong. He hasn't been back to his house since the fire. Hasn't answered his phone. He's either running or planning something. Can you track his credit card activity? Priest asked Wire. Already on it. Last transaction was Wednesday night. Gas station in Medina, 30 miles west. He's moving. Priest stood. Then we don't wait for the cops to catch up. Marcus, I want the hospital locked down. No one gets to Dorothy's floor unless staff or cleared visitors. Wire keep tracking him. Bones, call your or contacts at Akron PD and tell them we have intel that Robert's mobile and potentially a flight risk. Everyone nodded. As they stood to leave, Marcus looked at Priest. You really think he'd come back here to the hospital? With all of us guarding her, Priest's eyes were cold. Desperate men do desperate things, Reaper. And Robert Sullivan just watched his entire plan fall apart. He's got nothing left to lose. At 11:53 p.m. Friday night, they found Robert Sullivan at the Starlight Inn, 30 miles west of Akron, registered under a fake name, David Thompson, but using his own credit card, a mistake born of panic and exhaustion. 4 patrol cars surrounded the building. Detective Linda Shapiro led the entry, 51 years old, 28 years Akron PD, sharp-eyed, zero patience for excuses. A reputation for closing cases other detectives had written off as unsolvable. When they kicked in the door to room 12, they found Robert Sullivan sitting on the edge of the bed, watching television. He was eating a sandwich. Turkey and cheese from the vending machine. He'd showered, hair still damp, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. The TV was tuned to a basketball game. He looked up when the police burst in. Weapons drawn, voices loud and commanding. And his expression was something Shapiro would later describe in her report as annoyed. Not terrified, not shocked, just annoyed. Like a man interrupted during a normal evening. Robert Sullivan, you're under arrest for attempted murder, arson, elder abuse, grand theft, and insurance fraud. Get on the ground, hands behind your back. Now, Robert stood slowly. I didn't do anything wrong. On the ground, now, he complied, moving to his knees, then lying flat. Two officers pulled his arms behind him, cuffed his wrists. Read him his Miranda rights right there on the motel room carpet. Shapiro stepped closer, looked down at him. Where's the key, Robert? What key? The deadbolt key from your front door. The one you used to lock your mother inside before you started the fire. Robert's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Shapiro knelt down, reached into the pocket of Robert's jacket draped over a chair, and pulled out a small brass key. She held it up. Engraved on the handle, 4758. This key, the one that fits the deadbolt on the front door of 4758 Willow Creek Lane. The one that was missing from inside the house when the fire department arrived. The one your mother said you took with you when you locked her in and left. Robert said nothing. Shapiro bagged the key as evidence, stood, nodded to the officers. Get him out of here. They hauled Robert to his feet, marched him out to a patrol car. The harsh light from the motel's neon sign caught his face as they pushed him into the back seat. Not violently, just efficiently. He sat there, hands cuffed behind him, staring straight ahead. The same hands that had locked his mother inside a burning building. The same hands that had poured oil on the kitchen floor to make sure the fire spread faster. The same hands that had counted his mother's money and decided she was worth more dead than alive. At Mercy General Hospital, Marcus got the call at 12:14 a.m. Saturday morning. He was on guard duty outside room 314 with a brother called Diesel. The hallway was quiet. Visiting hours ended hours ago. Dorothy was asleep, sedated, safe. Marcus's phone buzzes. Detective Shapiro's number. Thompson. We got him. Robert Sullivan is in custody, arrested at 11:53 p.m., charged with attempted murder, arson, elder abuse, grand theft, and insurance fraud. He's being processed at county lockup right now. Bail hearing is Monday morning, but with the charges and the evidence, I'm confident the judge will deny bail or set it so high he won't make it. He's not going anywhere. Marcus felt something inside his chest unclench. Relief, justice, certainty. Thank you, Detective. Thank you, Thompson. And thank your brothers. The witness statements they collected. The canvassing they did. It made the case airtight. We couldn't have moved this fast without you. Marcus looked down the hallway where he could see two more brothers standing near the elevators. Still vigilant, still watchful. We're just doing what needed to be done. Well, it worked. She's safe now. Marcus hung up, turned to Diesel. They got him. Robert's in custody. Diesel nodded, slow smile spreading across his face. Good. Marcus glanced at the door to room 314. So we're done here. Not yet. We stay until she's discharged and settled somewhere safe. Robert might be locked up, but we don't leave a job half finished. Diesel clapped him on the shoulder. Damn right. Inside room 314, Dorothy Sullivan slept. Unaware that the man who'd tried to kill her was now in handcuffs. Unaware that 150 men she'd never met had decided she was worth protecting. Unaware that her life, which had almost ended on a Tuesday night in January, was about to begin again. Because sometimes the scariest looking people are the gentlest protectors, and sometimes justice comes on motorcycles. Dorothy Sullivan was discharged from Mercy General Hospital on January 23, 2025, 9 days after the fire that nearly took her life. She didn't go back to 4758 Willow Creek Lane. That house was a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape, crawling with investigators who were still cataloging evidence for Robert's trial. More than that, it was a place where her son had tried to kill her. She would never set foot in it again. The question was, where would she go? She had no other family, no siblings, no cousins within 3 states. Her husband had passed away. Her friends from church were kind, but elderly themselves. Unable to take in a woman who needed daily assistance and was still recovering from burns and smoke inhalation. The social worker assigned to her case was a tired woman named Jennifer Morris, mid-40s, overworked, underpaid, genuinely caring but operating within a system that had exactly three options for women like Dorothy. She sat beside Dorothy's hospital bed on January 22nd, the day before discharge, holding a folder with brochures. "Mrs. Sullivan, we've arranged placement for you at Sunset Manor. It's a group home. Very nice. Clean. They have 24-hour staff, meals provided, medical care on-site." Dorothy looked at the brochure. Smiling elderly people sitting in a common room, playing checkers, watching television, the kind of stock photos that made loneliness look like community. "How many residents?" Dorothy asked quietly. 43 currently. "You'd have a roommate, Mrs. Fletcher. She's 86. Very sweet. A roommate." Dorothy was 82 years old. She'd shared a bed with her husband for 58 years. But after Thomas died, she'd gotten used to sleeping alone, to having her own space, her own quiet. Now she was being told she'd share a room with a stranger, in a building with 43 other people she didn't know, where staff would be kind but busy, where meals would be institutional, where she'd be safe and cared for and utterly, completely alone. "When do I need to decide?" Dorothy asked. Jennifer checked her watch. "By tomorrow morning." "They need to know for scheduling." Dorothy held the brochure. Her hands were still bandaged, the burns healing but still painful. She stared at the smiling stock photo people and felt something inside her break just a little more. Another institution, another place where she'd be a number, a file, a problem solved. "Can I think about it?" "Of course." Jennifer stood, patted Dorothy's shoulder with the kind of professional sympathy that didn't quite reach genuine warmth. "I'll check back in the morning." She left. Dorothy sat alone in the room 314. The heart monitor beeped steady, the IV dripped. Outside her door, she could hear the low voices of the two brothers on guard duty. Bones and wire. Shift change happening soon. She looked at the brochure again. Read the description. Sunset Manor provides a warm, caring environment for seniors who need supportive services but aren't ready for skilled nursing care. Our residents enjoy daily activities, nutritious meals, and the comfort of knowing they're never alone. Never alone. Except Dorothy knew better. You could be surrounded by people and still be alone. She'd learned that living with Robert, sharing a house with her own son, and feeling more isolated than she ever had in her life. She set the brochure on the bedside table, closed her eyes. And for the first time since the fire, Dorothy let herself wonder if surviving had been worth it. An hour later, Priest walked into her room. Dorothy looked up, surprised. It was 8 p.m., past visiting hours. But somehow Priest had gotten past the nurses. Probably because half the nursing staff now knew the Hells Angels by name and had stopped questioning their presence. He pulled a chair close to her bed, sat down slowly, removed his sunglasses. Those kind, tired eyes looking at her with something that might have been understanding. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, voice gentle, "we've been working on something. I want you to hear me out before you say no." Dorothy waited. "There's a woman named Carol Brennan. She's 67, retired nurse, widowed, lives alone in a 3-bedroom house about 4 miles from here on Oakmont Street. She's also the aunt of one of our brothers, guy named Stitch. He's the Cleveland chapter's medic." Priest leaned forward. "Carol heard about what happened to you, and she called me 2 days ago. Said she has space, she has time, and she'd like to offer you a room, rent-free, for as long as you need it." Dorothy blinked, trying to process. "I don't understand. Why would she do that?" "Because she's good people," Priest said simply. "And because when Stitch told her about you, about what your son did, about how you survived, she said that woman shouldn't have to go to a group home where she doesn't know anyone. She's been through enough." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "I can't just impose on a stranger." "You wouldn't be imposing. Carol wants this. I talked to her myself. She's got a first-floor bedroom with an attached bathroom. Walker-friendly layout, no stairs, wide doorways. She's a nurse, so she knows how to help with your burns and medications." Priest paused. "And she's lonely, Mrs. Sullivan. Her husband passed away 3 years ago. Her kids live out of state. She's rattling around in that house by herself. You'd be helping her as much as she'd be helping you." Dorothy looked down at her bandaged hands. What if I can't pay her? I don't have much money left. Robert took most of it. Priest pulled an envelope from his jacket, set it on the bedside table. We're working on that too. Wire's been in contact with the prosecutor's office. They're filing a motion to freeze the remaining $85,000 in your accounts and return it to you. They're also pursuing restitution, forcing Robert to pay back the $200,000 he stole. It'll take time, but you'll get your money back. He gestured to the envelope. And in the meantime, the brothers took up a collection, passed the hat around, raised $23,000 in 3 days. It's yours, for medical bills, for living expenses, for whatever you need. Dorothy's breath caught. $23,000 from people who don't even know me. From people who know you almost died because your son valued money more than your life. From people who think that's unacceptable. From people who want to make sure you're okay. Priest's voice was steady. Certain. This is a check. It's in your name. No strings attached. You use it however you need to. Dorothy reached for the envelope with shaking hands. Opened it. Saw the number written there. $23,000. She couldn't speak. Just sat there staring. Tears streaming down her face. Priest stood, touched her shoulder gently. You don't have to decide right now, but Carol's coming to visit you this afternoon. Talk to her, see if it feels right. And whatever you decide will help you get there and get settled. Carol Brennan arrived at 2 p.m. exactly when she said she would. She was a short woman with gray hair cut in a practical bob, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent 40 years dealing with hospital chaos and knew how to stay calm under pressure. She wore jeans and a cardigan, carried a small bag, walked into room 314 like she belonged there, sat down beside Dorothy, smiled, and said, "Hi, I'm Carol. I hear you've had a hell of a week." Dorothy laughed, actually laughed for the first time since the fire. That's one way to put it. Priest told you about my offer. He did, Dorothy hesitated. But I don't want to be a burden. Carol waved a hand dismissively. Burden, please, you know what a burden is. A burden is sitting alone in a 3-bedroom house every night eating dinner by myself, watching Wheel of Fortune, and talking to the TV because there's nobody else to talk to. She leaned forward. You know what you'd be, company. Someone to cook for, someone to watch Jeopardy with, and yell at the contestants when they get the easy questions wrong. Dorothy smiled despite herself. I do like Jeopardy. See, Carol grinned. We're already compatible. She settled back in the chair. Listen, Dorothy, can I call you Dorothy, please? Dorothy, I'm not doing this out of pity. I'm doing this because I have space and you need space. And it seems silly for both of us to be alone when we could be not alone together. Carol's voice was practical. Matter of fact, I'm a nurse. I know how to change bandages and manage medications. I'm a decent cook. I've got a garden you can help with when you're feeling stronger if you want to. No pressure. And I've got a guest room that's just collecting dust. She met Dorothy's eyes. So what do you say? Give it a try for a month. If you hate it, if I'm annoying, if it doesn't work out, we'll find you somewhere else. No hard feelings. Dorothy looked at this woman, this stranger, offering her a home, offering her kindness, offering her something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Okay, Dorothy said softly. I'll try it. Carol's smile was genuine, warm. Good. I'll have the room ready by tomorrow. Priest said he's coordinating the move. Apparently a bunch of bikers are going to carry your stuff in. This will be the most exciting thing that's happened on Oakmont Street since Mrs. Henderson's cat got stuck in a tree. The next day, January 23rd, Dorothy was wheeled out of Mercy General Hospital. Hospital policy, even though she could walk with her walker. Marcus pushed the wheelchair. Priest walked beside her. Doc carried her small bag of belongings. In the parking lot, 20 motorcycles were lined up, engines rumbling low. Dorothy stopped, stared. What is this? Your escort, Marcus said. We're making sure you get to Carol's house safely. You don't have to. We know we don't have to, Priest said. We want to. They'd arranged a van for Dorothy. She couldn't ride on a motorcycle, not with her injuries. Doc drove. Marcus rode passenger seat. Dorothy sat in the back, looking out the window as 20 Harley-Davidsons fell into formation around the van. 2 in front, 2 behind, the rest flanking like an honor guard. They drove through Akron at exactly the speed limit. engines synchronized, chrome gleaming in the late afternoon sun. People on the sidewalk stopped and stared. A few pulled out phones, took pictures. One elderly man on a bench saluted. Dorothy watched it all, tears streaming down her face, thinking about how she'd spent 8 months living with her son and never felt more cared for than she did right now with these strangers. Carol's house on Oakmont Street was a small, tidy bungalow. Front porch, garden plot covered in winter mulch. Wind chimes hanging by the door that made a soft musical sound when the breeze caught them. The brothers carried in Dorothy's belongings, what little she had. Clothes from the hospital donation bin. Her own had been destroyed in the fire. Toiletries, a few books. The stuffed bear that Diesel had brought her in the hospital. She'd refused to let go of it. Carol showed Dorothy to her room. First floor, down the hall from the living room. The bed was made with crisp white sheets and a floral quilt. Nightstand with a lamp. Dresser, window overlooking the backyard. Simple, clean, safe. Bathroom's right through that door, Carol said, pointing. I put fresh towels in there, toothbrush, soap, all the basics. If you need anything else, just holler. Dorothy sat on the edge of the bed, ran her hand over the quilt. It was soft, real, hers for as long as she needed it. Thank you, she whispered. Carol smiled. You already said that 4 times. You don't have to keep saying that. Just settle in, rest, heal. And when you're ready, come out to the living room. I'm making soup. Over the next few days, the brothers made sure Dorothy had everything she needed. Wire arranged for a financial advisor to help Dorothy manage the $23,000 the club had raised. Set up a checking account in her name only. No power of attorney, no co-signers, just hers. Bones coordinated with the prosecutor's office to get a restraining order filed against Robert. 500 feet minimum distance. If he made bail unlikely but possible, he couldn't come within 500 feet of Dorothy or Carol's house. Doc scheduled Dorothy's follow-up appointments. Burn clinic, pulmonology for her smoke-damaged lungs, therapy for trauma. Drove her to every single one. Sat in the waiting room reading magazines he wasn't actually reading, just making sure she had someone there. Hammer, a 52-year-old brother who owned a security company, installed a new alarm system at Carol's house. Motion sensors on all doors and windows. Panic button by Dorothy's bed. Direct line to Akron PD and to Hammer's personal phone. And Marcus stopped by every Sunday. Brought flowers. Sat on the porch with Dorothy and Carol. Drank coffee. Talked about nothing important. Football, weather, the birds Dorothy loved so much, which were starting to return now that winter was easing toward spring. But healing wasn't just physical. Dorothy started seeing Dr. Lisa Morgan in early February. 49 years old. Trauma specialist. 26 years working with survivors of abuse, violence, and betrayal. She had an office in a professional building downtown. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, a box of tissues on every surface because her patients needed them. Dorothy sat across from her every Tuesday and Thursday, 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. The first session, Dr. Morgan asked Dorothy to tell her story from the beginning. Dorothy talked about Thomas, their 58 years together, how he'd been her best friend, how his death had left a hole in her life she didn't know how to fill. She talked about Robert, the son she'd raised, how he'd been a kind child, thoughtful, good student, how she'd been so proud of him. And then she talked about how he'd changed after his wife Elena died in 2020. That's when it started, Dorothy said, her voice quiet. After Elena's accident, he became obsessed with money, with debts, with everything falling apart. Dr. Morgan made notes, listening without judgment. Tell me about Elena's death. Dorothy looked out the window. February gray, cold but not freezing. Single vehicle accident. March 20th, 2020. Elena was driving home from work. Icy roads. Her car went off a bridge into the river. They ruled it accidental. Did you believe that Dorothy's hands twisted together in her lap? The burns had healed enough that the bandages were smaller now, but the scars remained. Thin white lines across her palms. I did at the time. But now Dorothy's voice broke. Now I wonder. Robert collected $164,000 from her life insurance. And now I know he tried to kill me for $200,000. So I wonder if Elena's accident was really an accident. Dr. Morgan leaned forward slightly. Dorothy, that's a very heavy thing to carry. The possibility that your son might have killed his wife and then tried to kill you. I know it sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy. It sounds like you're connecting patterns. And given what he did to you, those connections are valid. But they're also something the police will need to investigate, not something you need to solve. Dorothy nodded, but the doubt had been planted, and it grew. Over the next few weeks, Dorothy told Dr. Morgan everything about moving in with Robert in March 2024, how he'd been kind at first, attentive, caring, about how things changed in the fall, the closed curtains, the isolation, the way Robert hovered whenever neighbors visited, about giving him power of attorney in October, how he'd convinced her it was just for convenience, just to help, about watching $200,000 disappear from her accounts while Robert paid off his debts and she said nothing because he was her son and she trusted him. About the insurance questions in September, how he'd asked who the beneficiary was, how much it was worth. About January 14th, the night he locked her in and started the fire. And with each session, Dorothy began to understand something Dr. Morgan had been trying to teach her. This wasn't your fault, Dr. Morgan said in their sixth session. Late February, you didn't cause this. You didn't deserve this. Robert made a choice. He chose money over your life. That's on him, not you, but I should have seen it, Dorothy said. The signs were there, the closed curtains, the isolation, the money disappearing. I should have known. You're a mother who loved her son, Dr. Morgan said gently. You trusted him because that's what mothers do. He exploited that trust. That makes him a predator, not you a fool. Dorothy cried, the kind of crying that came from deep places, from months of holding it together because falling apart felt like surrender. Dr. Morgan handed her tissues, waited, let her cry. When Dorothy finally stopped, Dr. Morgan asked a question. What do you want from this, Dorothy, from therapy, from healing? What does the other side look like for you? Dorothy thought about it, wiped her eyes, took a breath. I want to feel safe again. I want to not flinch every time I hear a door lock. I want to sleep without dreaming about smoke. I want to stop feeling like a victim and start feeling like a survivor. Dr. Morgan smiled. Then that's what we'll work toward. In late February, Dorothy was helping Carol organize the garage. Carol had accumulated 40 years of nursing textbooks, Christmas decorations, and things that should have been thrown away decades ago. She'd declared Saturday a cleaning day. Dorothy had offered to help. They were going through boxes in the corner when Dorothy found one marked Dorothy, Fire, her belongings, the things the brothers had salvaged from 4758 Willow Creek Lane before it was demolished. Carol looked at the box. You don't have to go through that if you're not ready. But Dorothy was curious. She opened it. Inside were things she'd forgotten she owned. A sweater, a book, a set of reading glasses, and at the bottom a photo album. Dorothy pulled it out. The cover was smoke damaged but intact. She opened it carefully. The first page was Robert as a child, age 5, sitting in the library where Dorothy had worked for 40 years. Story time. He was holding a book, smiling, gap-toothed, and innocent. The next page, Robert at 12, science fair. He'd built a volcano. Dorothy and Thomas stood beside him, beaming, proud parents, age 16, high school graduation, cap and gown, the future stretching ahead. Dorothy turned the pages slowly, watching her son grow up in photographs, watching the kind, thoughtful boy become a man. Then she reached the recent photos. Robert's wedding to Elena, 2015. They looked happy, in love. Elena was beautiful. Dark hair, bright smile. Dorothy remembered thinking Robert had chosen well. And then, Elena's funeral. March 2020. Dorothy stared at that photo for a long time. Robert stood beside the casket, wearing a black suit. His face was supposed to show grief, loss, the devastation of losing a spouse. But Dorothy looked at that face now, with everything she knew, everything she'd learned, everything she suspected. And she saw something else. Not grief, calculation. The face of a man who'd just collected $164,000 and was already planning how to spend it. Carol found Dorothy sitting on the garage floor, staring at the photo, tears streaming down her face. Dorothy, look at his face, Dorothy whispered, at Elena's funeral. Look at his face. Carol knelt down, looked at the photo. What do you see? I see a man who's not grieving. I see a man who's planning. And I think Dorothy's voice broke. I think he killed her too. I think the accident wasn't an accident. I think he's been doing this for years. Carol took the photo album, closed it gently, set it aside. Then we make sure the police know. We make sure they investigate. We make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else. Dorothy nodded. But the knowledge sat heavy in her chest. Her son wasn't just a man who'd tried to kill her. He was a man who'd been killing for money, who'd murdered his wife, who'd almost murdered his mother. And she'd raised him, loved him, fed him, taught him right from wrong. Where had it gone so terribly wrong? The bail hearing was March 12th, 2025, 8 weeks after the fire. Dorothy didn't attend. Her attorney represented her interests. Priest sent Bones to observe and report back. The hearing lasted 11 minutes. Robert's public defender argued that he was not a flight risk, had no prior criminal record, should be released on bond pending trial, requested $50,000 bail. The prosecutor countered with the evidence: attempted murder, arson of an occupied dwelling, elder abuse, grand theft, insurance fraud, pointed out that Robert had already demonstrated willingness to kill for money and had fled to a motel under a fake name when he suspected police were closing in, argued he was both a danger to the community and a flight risk, requested bail be denied entirely. The judge reviewed the case file for 3 minutes, then looked up. Mr. Sullivan, the evidence against you is substantial and deeply troubling. You are charged with attempting to murder your own mother in order to collect life insurance money. The fire investigator's report confirms arson. Financial records show motive. Witness testimony establishes a pattern of abuse and isolation. Your mother's own sworn statement places you at the scene, locking her inside before the fire started. The judge's voice was hard, final. Given the severity of the charges, the strength of the evidence, and your demonstrated flight risk, I am denying bail. You will remain in custody pending trial. Robert stared at the judge, face pale, hands cuffed in front of him. He opened his mouth to speak. His attorney put a hand on his arm. Don't. Court is adjourned. They led Robert back to the holding cells. He would stay there until trial, which was scheduled for June. Bones called Priest from the courthouse steps. Bail denied. He's not going anywhere. Priest relayed the news to Dorothy that afternoon. She cried, not from sadness, from relief, the kind of relief that comes when you finally truly believe you're safe. In March, prosecutor James Rivera contacted Dorothy's attorney. He wanted to meet with Dorothy, prepare her for trial, discuss whether she wanted to testify. They met at Carol's house. Rivera was 53, career prosecutor, 29 years putting criminals away. He'd seen every variation of family betrayal the courts could produce. But this case had gotten to him, Mrs. Sullivan, Rivera said, sitting at Carol's kitchen table, Dorothy across from him, Carol nearby, Marcus standing by the door like a silent guardian. I want you to understand something. We have an overwhelming case against your son. The physical evidence alone would convict him. The space heater, the timer, the key in his pocket, the financial records. We don't need your testimony to win. Dorothy waited, but Rivera leaned forward. Your testimony would do something the evidence can't. It would show the jury the human cost. They'll see bank statements and arson reports and think this is terrible. But if you testify, if you tell them what it felt like to smell smoke and try to escape and find the door locked, they'll understand this isn't just terrible. It's evil. He paused. The choice is yours. You don't have to testify. You don't owe anyone that. But if you want to, I'll prepare you. I'll make sure you're ready. Dorothy looked at her hands, the scars, the permanent reminder of the night her son tried to kill her. Then she looked at Marcus, at the man who'd pulled her from the fire, who'd refused to leave her alone, who'd brought 150 brothers to protect her. I want to testify, Dorothy said, her voice steady. I want Robert to hear me. I want him to know he didn't win, that I survived, that I refused to disappear. Rivera nodded. Then we start preparing tomorrow. Over the next 3 months, Dorothy transformed. February, she'd been scared, fragile, hands shaking when she heard sudden noises, flinching when doors closed. March, she started getting stronger, physically and emotionally. The burns healed. The nightmares came less frequently. She could walk without the walker, could cook simple meals, could laugh at Carol's jokes. April, she started volunteering. Carol's church needed help with their elderly shut-in program, delivering meals, making phone calls. Dorothy started going along, helping. One afternoon, she visited a 90-year-old man named Harold who lived alone. His daughter lived 3 states away. He was lonely, isolated, vulnerable. Dorothy sat with him for an hour, talked about the weather and the tigers and nothing important. But when she left, Harold said, "Thank you for coming. Nobody visits anymore." Dorothy understood. She'd been invisible too, alone while surrounded by people, forgotten. "I'll be back next week," she promised. And she was. May arrived and Dorothy was ready. She'd met with Rivera 4 times, walked through every likely question, practiced her answers, learned how to pause before responding, how to look at the jury, how to speak clearly and calmly even when reliving trauma. Rivera asked her once, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Dorothy's answer was immediate. "Certain, I need to. I need to stand in that courtroom and tell the truth about what he did. Not for revenge, for voice, for reclaiming what he tried to take from me." Rivera smiled. "Then you'll be an excellent witness." On a Sunday in mid-May, Marcus visited like he did every week. He brought flowers. Tulips this time. Dorothy's favorites. They sat on Carol's front porch. Coffee and cookies Carol had baked. The weather was warming. Spring finally here. Dorothy asked him a question that she'd been wondering about for months. "Why did you come back to the hospital that morning? After you saved me from the fire. You'd already done more than anyone could ask. Why come back?" Marcus looked out at the yard, at the garden Carol had planted, at the wind chimes swaying gently. "I've been a firefighter for 12 years, he said. "Before that, I was an army medic in Iraq. I've saved a lot of lives. It's what I do." He turned to look at her. "But most of the time I save someone, and then I never see them again. I pull them out of a car wreck or a burning building, hand them off to the paramedics, and that's it. I never find out if they're okay, if they recovered, if their life got better." His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "With you, I couldn't let it go, because I saw that locked door, and I knew someone had done that to you on purpose. And I thought if I save her from the fire, but don't protect her from whoever tried to kill her, then I didn't really save her at all." Dorothy reached out, squeezed his hand. "You saved me twice then, once from the fire, once from being alone." Marcus smiled. "You were never alone, Mrs. Sullivan. You just didn't know it yet." Dorothy thought about that, about the 150 brothers who'd shown up, about Carol who'd offered her home, about Priest and Bones and Wire and Doc and Hammer, and all the others who'd decided a stranger's life was worth protecting, about how she'd spent 8 months living with her son and feeling invisible, and how she'd spent 4 months living with Carol and finally feeling seen. "I know it now," Dorothy said. "Good." They sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, watching spring arrive. The trial would start in 3 weeks. Robert would face justice. Dorothy would testify. The brothers would be there. But right now, in this moment, sitting on Carol's porch with tulips in a vase and cookies on a plate, and a man who'd decided she was worth saving. Right now, Dorothy Sullivan was not just surviving, she was living, and that she thought was the best revenge of all. The trial began on Monday, the June 16th, 2025, 5 months after the fire that should have killed Dorothy Sullivan. Cascade County Courthouse. Courtroom C, 3rd floor. High ceilings, wood paneling. The kind of room where justice was supposed to happen and sometimes actually did. The gallery was packed. Media filled the back rows. This case had everything news outlets loved. Elderly victim, evil son, insurance fraud, and 150 bikers who decided to protect her. The story had gone national. CNN had run a segment. The New York Times had written a feature. Documentary producers were already calling Dorothy's attorney asking for interviews. Dorothy had declined everything. This wasn't entertainment. This wasn't content. This was her life. 12 Hells Angels sat in the gallery, maximum allowed by court security. They'd drawn straws. 38 brothers had shown up that morning. 12 got seats. The rest waited outside in the June heat. Engines silent. Vigil. Dorothy sat in the second row, between Carol and Marcus. She wore a lavender blouse Carol had bought her, simple, dignified. Her hair was neat, her hands no longer bandaged, the scars visible but healed. She looked healthy, strong, like a woman who had survived and decided survival wasn't enough. She wanted justice. Robert Sullivan was led into the courtroom at 9 a.m. exactly. Orange jail jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him, ankles shackled. 5 months in county lockup had changed him. He was thinner, paler, the kind of pallor that came from fluorescent lights in no sunlight. His attorney had provided a suit for trial. Navy blue, white shirt, conservative tie, trying to make him look respectable, like a man who'd made a mistake instead of a predator who'd tried to murder his mother. When Robert entered, his eyes scanned the courtroom, looking for familiar faces, looking for something. They landed on Dorothy. She didn't look away, didn't flinch. For the first time in her life, Dorothy Sullivan looked at her son without fear, because 12 Hell's Angels sat behind her, because Carol's hand rested on her shoulder, because Marcus sat to her left, radiating the kind of protective energy that said anyone who threatened this woman would have to go through him first. Robert held her gaze for 3 seconds, then looked away. Judge Helen Crawford entered, 68 years old, 30 years on the bench. She'd seen every variation of family betrayal the courts could produce, but this case had made her physically ill when she'd read the preliminary evidence. All rise, everyone stood. Be seated, everyone sat. Judge Crawford looked at the prosecution table, at James Rivera and his assistant counsel, then at the defense table, at Robert and his public defender, Thomas Reed. We're here for the matter of People versus Robert Thomas Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan stands charged with 5 counts: attempted murder in the first degree, arson of an occupied dwelling, elder abuse, grand theft, insurance fraud. She looked at the jury, 12 people selected over 3 days, 7 women, 5 men, ages ranging from 23 to 71. These were the people who would decide Robert's fate. Mr. Rivera. Your opening statement. Rivera stood, 53 years old, career prosecutor. He'd prepared for this trial like it was the most important case of his life, because to Dorothy Sullivan it was. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Rivera began. His voice was calm, steady, authoritative without being aggressive. On January 14th, 2025, at approximately 7:15 p.m., a fire started in the kitchen of 4758 Willow Creek Lane in Akron, Ohio. That fire was not an accident. It was deliberate. It was planned. And it was started by the defendant, Robert Sullivan, with one purpose: to murder his 82-year-old mother, Dorothy Sullivan, in order to collect $200,000 in life insurance money. Rivera walked toward the jury box. Over the next few days, you will hear testimony from fire investigators who will tell you this fire was arson. You will see evidence of a space heater purchased the day of the fire, a timer set to ignite at exactly 7:15 p.m., cooking oil poured on the floor to accelerate the flames. You will hear from the firefighter who kicked down the door and found the deadbolt locked from the outside, the key missing from inside. Dorothy Sullivan unconscious near the door, having tried to escape and failed because her own son had locked her in. Rivera's voice hardened. You will see financial records showing that Robert Sullivan stole $200,000 from his mother over 8 months, that he was drowning in debt, that in September he took out a life insurance policy on Dorothy with himself as beneficiary, and that on January 14th, when the money ran out, he decided the fastest way to collect was to kill her and make it look like an accident. He paused. Let that sink in. This is not a complicated case. The evidence is overwhelming. The defendant's guilt is clear. And by the end of this trial, you will have no doubt, no reasonable doubt, that Robert Sullivan locked his mother in a burning house and left her to die. Rivera sat down. Judge Crawford looked at the defense table. Mr. Reed, your opening statement. Thomas Reed stood, 41 years old, public defender, overworked, underpaid. He tried to get Robert to take a plea deal, 12 years instead of life. Robert had refused, insisted on trial, insisted he was innocent. Now Reed had to defend the indefensible. Ladies and gentlemen, Reed began. His voice was careful, measured. My client Robert Sullivan loved his mother. He cared for her after his father died. He gave her a home. He tried to help her manage her finances. Yes, there were problems. Yes, money was tight. But that doesn't make him a murderer. Reed walked slowly. The prosecution will show you evidence of a fire, of financial troubles, of decisions that in hindsight look suspicious, but they can't show you intent. They can't prove that Robert Sullivan wanted his mother dead. They can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this was anything more than a tragic accident compounded by poor judgment. He looked at the jury. I ask you to keep an open mind, to listen to all the evidence, and to remember that in this country we don't convict people based on suspicion. We convict them based on proof, and the prosecution's proof will not be enough. Reed sat down. Dorothy felt Carol squeeze her hand, heard Marcus exhale slowly beside her. The brothers in the gallery remained perfectly still, silent, watchful. The trial had begun. The prosecution spent the next 2 days presenting evidence, 27 pieces, each one documented, photographed, entered into the record. Fire investigator David Chen took the stand first, walked the jury through what he'd found at 4758 Willow Creek Lane. The fire started in the kitchen. Ignition point was a Lasco Model 754-200 space heater, brand new. Still had the price tag, purchased at Becker's Hardware on January 14th at 3:17 p.m. Chen displayed photographs. The heater, the timer, the burn patterns. The heater was positioned against curtains, plugged into an electrical timer set for 7:15 p.m. Cooking oil was poured on the floor in a pattern consistent with deliberate accelerant placement. This was arson. No question. Defense attorney Reed cross-examined. Mr. Chen, isn't it possible the defendant purchased the heater for legitimate reasons, that the fire was accidental? Chen's answer was flat. Certain. The timer was set, the oil was poured, the deadbolt was locked from outside. This wasn't accidental. Next witness, Marcus Thompson. He walked to the stand in his dress uniform. Akron Fire Department. 12 years of commendations visible on his chest. Rivera asked him to describe the rescue. I arrived at 7:32 p.m., kicked down the front door immediately. The deadbolt was engaged from the outside. The key that should have been on the hook beside the door was missing. I found Dorothy Sullivan unconscious near the door. She tried to escape but couldn't because the door was locked. Marcus's voice was steady, professional, but Dorothy could hear the emotion beneath it. If I'd been 30 seconds slower, the roof would have collapsed. She would have died, and so would I. The jury listened. 3 women were already crying. Wire took the stand next. Jason Park, financial investigator. He presented a visual timeline, color-coded, easy to understand even for people who didn't speak accounting. Robert Sullivan had total debts of $114,000. His income averaged $1,400 a month. His expenses were $2,500. He was drowning financially. Wire clicked to the next slide. After Dorothy's husband, Thomas, died in May 2024, Robert convinced her to give him power of attorney. Dorothy sold her house for $285,000. That money should have been held in trust for her care. How much remained, Rivera asked. $85,000. Robert withdrew $200,000 over 8 months, paid off his mortgage, his credit cards, his loans, used his mother's money to solve his financial crisis. And when that money ran out, Wire clicked to another slide, the insurance policy. In September 2024, Robert took out a life insurance policy on Dorothy, American Heritage Life, $200,000 payout. Beneficiary Robert Sullivan, premium $240 a month. Wire looked at the jury. By January, Robert was desperate again. The money was gone. He was back in debt, and he had a $200,000 policy on his mother's life. If she died, he'd collect, plus the remaining $85,000 in her accounts, plus her estate, total over $300,000, enough to clear his debts and start over. The jury was riveted. Defense cross-examination was weak. Reed tried to argue that power of attorney was normal, that the insurance policy was responsible planning. The jury wasn't buying it. Wednesday afternoon, witness testimonies. Patricia Chen took the stand, the neighbor from Willow Creek Lane, 63 years old. She'd been crying since she entered the courtroom. Rivera asked her what she'd observed in the months before the fire. I saw Dorothy declining, Patricia said, her voice shaking. In October, I went to visit her. She was sitting on the porch. She looked thinner, scared. When I asked if Robert was taking good care of her, she hesitated. then said yes. But she wouldn't look at me. She looked at the door, like she was afraid he was listening. Did you report your concerns? Patricia's face crumpled. No, I mentioned it to another neighbor. She said family takes care of family. I should mind my business. And I let it go. I convinced myself I was overreacting. Patricia sobbed openly. I should have called someone, Adult Protective Services, the police, anyone. She almost died because I was too scared to make a phone call. Rivera's voice was gentle. You're telling us now, that matters. Dr. Alan Kowalski testified next, Dorothy's physician. I tried to follow up, Dr. Kowalski said. Dorothy missed her quarterly checkup in November. That's unusual for her. She's always been diligent about her health. My receptionist called to reschedule. Robert answered, said Dorothy was doing great. Didn't need an appointment right now. Did you speak to Dorothy directly? No. And that was a protocol failure. When a patient has given power of attorney, we're supposed to confirm with the patient directly, not just the representative. But I was busy. We had a backlog. I assumed her son had her best interests at heart. Dr. Kowalski removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes. I should have insisted. 3 months without medical oversight. Anything could have happened, and I wouldn't have known. Martin Chen, the bartender from O'Malley's pub, testified about Robert's behavior the night of the fire. He came in around 7:10 p.m., ordered a beer, seemed nervous, kept checking his phone, tapping his fingers on the bar. How long did he stay? About 40 minutes. Then his phone rang. I heard him say, "What a fire, oh my God." Then he ran out, left money on the bar, didn't wait for change. Did he seem surprised by the call? Martin hesitated, then spoke carefully. He seemed like a guy who was waiting for bad news and just got it. Not shocked, more like confirmed. The prosecution rested Wednesday evening. Judge Crawford looked at the defense. Mr. Reed, you may call your first witness tomorrow morning. Thursday, defense's turn. Reed called 3 witnesses. A former co-worker who said Robert was a good guy. A neighbor who said he'd seemed devoted to his mother. A financial advisor who testified that power of attorney was common and not inherently suspicious. None of it mattered. The prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Documentary, forensic, financial, testimonial, and everyone in that courtroom knew what was coming next. Thursday afternoon, 3:15 p.m., Prosecutor Rivera stood. The people called Dorothy Mae Sullivan. The courtroom went silent. Dorothy stood, walked to the witness stand with her walker. She didn't need it anymore. Could walk fine without it. But Dr. Morgan had suggested bringing it anyway. Visual reminder to the jury of her age, her vulnerability. She wore the lavender blouse. Her hair was neat. The scars on her hands visible when she raised her right hand to take the oath. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Please state your name for the record. Dorothy Mae Sullivan. You may be seated. Dorothy sat. The witness chair felt enormous. But she wasn't scared. She'd practiced this, prepared for this. She was ready. She could see the entire courtroom from here. The jury to her left, Robert at the defense table ahead and to the right, Judge Crawford directly in front, Carol and Marcus and the brothers in the gallery behind the prosecutor. Prosecutor Rivera approached. His face was kind, professional. Mrs. Sullivan, can you tell the jury about your husband, Thomas? Dorothy's voice was steady, stronger than she'd expected. Thomas and I were married 58 years. He died in May of 2024. Heart attack. We'd been best friends since we were 23. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. What happened after Thomas passed away? Dorothy took a breath. Robert said I shouldn't live alone, that our house was too big for just me, that I should sell it and move in with him. He said he'd take care of me. Did you want to move? No. But Robert was insistent, said it made sense financially, that he had room, that I'd be safer with him. When did you move in with Robert? March 2024, about 10 months before the fire. How was it at first? Fine. For the first few months, Robert seemed genuinely caring. He cooked meals, made sure I took my medications. We watched television together. When did things change? Dorothy looked at Robert. He was staring at the table. Wouldn't meet her eyes. September, she said. He started asking about money, about my finances. How much did Thomas leave me? How much was the house worth? Did I have life insurance? Who was the beneficiary? What did you tell him? That Thomas had been careful, that we'd saved, that there was money and insurance in the house sale. But I didn't give exact numbers. It felt wrong. Why? Because it felt like he was counting my assets while I was still alive. Dorothy's voice was clear. Certain. Did he push? Yes. He convinced me to give him power of attorney, said it was for convenience, in case something happened to me, so he could help manage things. She paused. I signed the papers. I trusted him. He's my son. What happened after you gave him power of attorney? The house got darker. Robert started closing all the curtains. Even during the day, he said it saved heating costs, but it felt like he was hiding me. Did anyone visit? Patricia Chen tried in October, but Robert hovered while we talked. I could feel him listening. I got scared. Scared of your own son. Yes. Dorothy's hands trembled slightly, but her voice held. Every time I thought about saying something, I'd think maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was ungrateful. Maybe this was normal and I was just old and confused. You're not confused, Mrs. Sullivan. No, I'm not. Tell the jury what happened on January 14th. Dorothy closed her eyes briefly, opened them, looked at the jury. Robert came home around 6:30. He'd been gone most of the day. He seemed nervous, kept checking his phone. Then he said he needed to go to Home Depot. Light bulbs. Would be back in an hour. What happened next? I heard him walk to the front door. Then I heard the deadbolt click. From inside or outside the door, outside, Dorothy's voice was absolutely certain. I know that sound. It's different when you lock it from inside versus outside. He locked it from outside, and he took the key with him. What did you do? I was watching the news. Then about 15 minutes later, I smelled smoke. Dorothy's voice started to break, but she continued. I went to the kitchen, and I saw flames, big flames, already spreading up the curtains. There was a space heater I'd never seen before, right against the wall. Did you try to put out the fire? I tried. I grabbed a dish towel, but it was too big, and the floor was slippery. There was oil everywhere. I slipped, fell, burned my hands. She held up her scarred palms. That's when I got these. What did you do then? I got my walker. Moved as fast as I could to the front door. I pulled the handle. I twisted it, but it wouldn't open. Dorothy's voice cracked. The deadbolt was locked, and the key wasn't there. It's always on the hook by the door. But Robert had taken it. The courtroom was absolutely silent. You could hear the ventilation system. Someone in the gallery crying quietly. What happened next, Mrs. Sullivan? I pulled and pulled, and the door wouldn't open, and I could hear the fire getting louder, and the smoke was so thick, and I couldn't breathe. Dorothy was crying now, but still speaking clearly. I thought I was going to die. I thought my son had locked me in, and I was going to die. But you didn't die. I called 911. I don't remember doing it, but they said I did. Then I collapsed. Everything went black. When you woke up in the hospital, what did you understand had happened? Dorothy looked directly at Robert. I understood that my son locked me in a burning house so he could collect insurance money, that he valued $200,000 more than my life, that he tried to murder me. Rivera nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. Defense attorney Reed stood, approached the witness stand carefully. Mrs. Sullivan, he began. His voice was gentle but probing. You're 82 years old. Memory can be unreliable at that age. Are you certain about the sequence of events? Dorothy's eyes flashed. I am 82 years old. I am not confused. I worked as a librarian for 40 years, cataloged thousands of books, remembered every patron's name, never made an error. My mind is sharp. She leaned forward. I heard that deadbolt. I smelled the smoke. I tried that door. It was locked. My son did that. Reed had no follow-up. He glanced at his notes, tried another angle. Isn't it possible you misunderstood your son's intentions? That the locked door was a mistake? No. Reed persisted. How can you be sure? Because Dorothy said, her voice cold and final. In September, he asked about my life insurance. In October, he took power of attorney and started withdrawing my money. In December, the money ran out. In January, he bought a space heater, set a timer, poured oil on my kitchen floor, locked me inside, and drove 15 miles away to establish an alibi. She stared at Reed. That's not a series of mistakes. That's premeditated murder. Reed sat down. He had nothing else. Rivera stood. No, redirect, Your Honor. The witness has said everything that needs to be said. Dorothy stood, walked back to her seat. As she passed the defense table, Robert finally looked at her. Their eyes met, and Robert whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. I'm sorry, Mom. Dorothy stopped, looked at him, really looked, at the man who'd been her little boy, who she'd raised and loved and trusted. And she said, voice clear enough that the jury heard, no, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. Then she continued walking. Marcus helped her sit. Carol took her hand. The brothers in the gallery remained perfectly still. But Thunder, sitting in the front row, nodded once. Respect. Friday morning. Closing arguments. Rivera went first. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a complicated case. Robert Sullivan was drowning in debt. His mother had money. He convinced her to give him power of attorney. He stole $200,000. When that money ran out, he took out a life insurance policy on her life. And when he needed that money, he locked her in a burning house and left her to die. Rivera walked along the jury box. The evidence is overwhelming. The space heater purchased the day of the fire. The timer set for 7:15 p.m. The cooking oil accelerant. The deadbolt locked from outside. The key found in his pocket when he was arrested. He paused. Dorothy Sullivan raised this man, fed him, loved him, trusted him. He repaid that love by locking her in a burning house for $200,000. Rivera's voice hardened. Justice demands a guilty verdict on all counts. Defense closing was weak. Reed argued temporary insanity, financial stress, tragic accident misunderstood. The jury's faces said they weren't buying it. Judge Crawford gave jury instructions at 11 a.m. The jury retired to deliberate at 11:17. Dorothy waited in a conference room down the hall, Carol beside her, Marcus pacing, Priest sitting calmly reading a newspaper he wasn't actually reading. The brothers had gathered outside the courthouse, 50 of them, waiting. At 1:03 p.m., the bailiff emerged. We have a verdict. Dorothy's heart stopped. They filed back into the courtroom, took their seats. Robert was brought in from holding. He looked small, defeated. The jury foreman stood, a woman in her early 60s, retired teacher. She'd been crying during Dorothy's testimony. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Crawford asked. We have, Your Honor, on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree. How do you find? We find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Dorothy felt Carol's hand squeeze hers, heard Marcus's sharp exhale, Thunder's quiet yes from behind her. Judge Crawford banged her gavel. Order, order in the court. The room quieted. On the charge of arson of an occupied dwelling, how do you find guilty? On the charge of elder abuse, guilty. On the charge of grand theft, guilty. On the charge of insurance fraud, guilty. 5 counts, 5 guilty verdicts. Robert's face had gone gray. His attorney was whispering something. But Robert wasn't listening. He was staring at the table, staring at the end of everything. Judge Crawford addressed the courtroom. Sentencing will be in 1 week, June 20th. Court is adjourned. Dorothy stood on shaking legs, turned. Thunder was there, arms open. She walked into them. Let herself be held by a man who'd lost his brother to the same kind of evil that had nearly killed her. You did it, Thunder said quietly. You survived. You testified. You won. We won, Dorothy corrected. All of us. Outside the courthouse, despite the summer heat, 100 motorcycles had gathered. When Dorothy emerged, they started their engines in unison. Not driving away, just revving. The sound of victory, the sound of justice, the sound of a woman who'd refused to die finally being heard by everyone who mattered. June 20th, sentencing. Judge Crawford had spent a week reviewing the case file. The evidence, Dorothy's victim impact statement, Robert's complete lack of remorse. Robert stood before her in orange jail scrubs, thinner than he'd been 5 months ago. Mr. Sullivan, Judge Crawford began, you exploited your mother's grief. You isolated her. You stole $200,000 from her. You locked her in a burning house and started a fire hoping she would die so you could collect insurance money. Her voice was hard, disgusted. The state recommends 8 to 12 years. I've reviewed everything. I've read Dorothy Sullivan's statement. I've considered your complete lack of remorse. She paused. I'm giving you 20 years in state prison. No parole eligibility for 10 years. Full restitution ordered for all stolen funds plus damages. Permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with Mrs. Sullivan. Judge Crawford leaned forward. And Mr. Sullivan, I want you to spend those 10 years thinking about the fact that Dorothy Sullivan survived your abuse, documented your crimes, and is currently thriving while you rot in prison. Gavel came down, dismissed. Robert was led away in handcuffs. He didn't look at Dorothy, didn't speak, just shuffled out with the defeated posture of a man who'd lost everything. Dorothy stood in the courtroom, Carol on one side, Marcus on the other, and felt nothing but relief. Exhausted relief. The relief of a war finally ending. 6 months later, December 2025, Dorothy Sullivan stood in Carol's kitchen making cookies. Chocolate chip, oatmeal raisin, snickerdoodles. Enough for 40 people because that's how many families would be in the ICU waiting room at Mercy General Hospital tomorrow when she did her Thursday volunteer shift. She'd started volunteering in July. Once a week, every Thursday afternoon. She brought cookies she and Carol baked, sat with families waiting for news about their loved ones, listened, comforted, told them I know how scary this is. But you're not alone. The hospital staff called her the Cookie Lady. Families asked for her by name. One woman whose husband had been in a motorcycle accident and spent 2 weeks in the ICU had told Dorothy, "You made the worst time of my life bearable. Just knowing someone cared made all the difference." Dorothy had smiled and said, "Someone cared for me when I needed it most. I'm just passing it forward." Carol walked into the kitchen, poured herself coffee, watched Dorothy work. "You're humming," Carol observed. "Am I?" "You are. Haven't heard you hum in months." Dorothy realized Carol was right. She was humming, some old song from the 40s that Thomas used to sing. "I'm happy," Dorothy said, surprised by the truth of it. "Good. You deserve to be happy." They'd been living together for 11 months now. Two widows who'd been alone, who weren't alone anymore. They watched Jeopardy every night, yelled at contestants, planted a garden in the spring, tomatoes, peppers, herbs. Carol had taught Dorothy to use her smartphone. Dorothy had taught Carol to knit. They weren't just roommates, they were family, the kind you choose, the kind that shows up, the kind that stays. Dorothy's hands moved efficiently. Rolling dough, cutting shapes, her scars were permanent, thin white lines across her palms. But they didn't hurt anymore. They were just reminders of what she'd survived, of what she'd overcome, of the night she'd almost died and the morning she'd decided to live. On a Sunday afternoon in late September, Dorothy sat on Carol's front porch with Marcus. Coffee, cookies, autumn leaves turning gold. Marcus still visited every week, like clockwork, brought flowers, sat, talked about nothing important. But today, Dorothy had a question. "I've been thinking," she said, "about that night, the fire, you crawling through smoke to reach me. The battalion chief was going to call you out. You had 30 seconds. What if you'd been 30 seconds slower?" Marcus looked at her, smiled. "But I wasn't. But what if you had been, then I would have tried anyway. And maybe I would have made it, or maybe I wouldn't have. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try." Dorothy nodded slowly. "I think that's the difference, isn't it, between people who try and people who don't. It's not about being fearless or having special skills. It's just about deciding another person's life is worth the risk. That's all it is," Marcus agreed. "Just deciding to give a damn." They sat in silence, wind chimes singing, motorcycles in the driveway gleaming. "Thank you," Dorothy said, "for the 100th time." "Thank you," Marcus smiled. "You don't have to keep thanking me, Mrs. Sullivan. Just keep planting those tomatoes. Keep volunteering at the hospital. Keep living your life. That's thanks enough." Dorothy thought about that, about the life she was living. She had a home. She had Carol. She had the brothers who still checked in, who still called her on holidays, who'd made it clear she was family. She had her volunteer work, helping other people who were scared and alone, being the person for them that Marcus and Priest and all the brothers had been for her. She had her garden, her crossword puzzles, her Thursday Jeopardy nights with Carol, where they yelled at the television and laughed until they cried. She had a future, and Robert had a cell. That seemed like justice. 1 year after the fire, January 14th, 2026. Dorothy woke up in her bedroom at Carol's house, the room she'd lived in for exactly 1 year, the room that had become home. She got dressed, made coffee. Carol was already up, making breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, the comfortable routine of two people who'd learned to live together. "You okay?" Carol asked. She knew what day it was. "I'm okay," Dorothy said, and meant it. They ate breakfast, washed dishes. Carol left for her book club. Dorothy had the house to herself. She walked to her bedroom, opened her closet, pulled out a box from the top shelf. The photo album, the one she'd found in the garage last February, the one with pictures of Robert growing up. She sat on the bed, opened it. Robert at 5. Gap-toothed and innocent. Robert at 12. Science fair winner. Robert at 16. High school graduate. Robert and Elena. Wedding day. So happy. Elena's funeral. Robert's calculating face. Dorothy looked at that last photo for a long time. The police had reopened Elena's case. Wire had helped them. Found inconsistencies in the accident report. Suspicious financial activity. Life insurance policy taken out 6 months before the crash. They were investigating, building a case. Robert might spend the rest of his life in prison, not just for trying to kill Dorothy, but for killing Elena too. Dorothy hoped so, not for revenge, for justice, for Elena who deserved better than a husband who'd murdered her for money. Dorothy closed the album, put it back into the box, put the box back in the closet. She didn't need to look at it anymore. That wasn't her life. That was her past. Her life was now, was Carol, was the brothers, was the families she helped at the hospital, was the tomatoes in the garden, was the wind chimes on the porch, was deciding every single day that surviving wasn't enough. She wanted to live, and she was. Dorothy walked to the kitchen, started gathering ingredients for cookies. Thursday was tomorrow. The families would be waiting, and the cookie lady never disappointed. That evening, Marcus called. "Just checking in," he said. "I know what day it is." "I'm okay," Dorothy told him. "Really, I'm okay." "Good. Priest wanted me to tell you there's a ride next Sunday. If you want to come, we've got a sidecar. Thunder's aunt uses it sometimes, a motorcycle ride." "Why not? You've got family who rides. Might as well see what it's like." Dorothy laughed. "I'm 83 years old." And Marcus's voice held a smile. "You survived a house fire. You testified against your son. You're volunteering at hospitals and baking cookies and living your life. A motorcycle ride seems pretty tame by comparison." Dorothy thought about it. About strapping into a sidecar and riding with 150 bikers who decided she was worth protecting. About feeling the wind and the sun and being alive in a way she hadn't been in years. "Okay," she said. "I'll come." Marcus laughed. "Priest is going to love this. I'll pick you up at 10. After they hung up, Dorothy sat on Carol's couch, looking out at the yard, at the garden, at the life she'd built from ashes. And she thought about a question someone had asked her once at the hospital. A young woman, maybe 30. Her mother was in ICU after a stroke. She'd been sitting in the waiting room for hours, scared, alone. Dorothy had brought her cookies, sat with her, listened. And the woman had asked, "How do you do it? How do you keep going after something terrible happens?" Dorothy had thought about that, really thought. Then she'd said, "You decide that what happened to you doesn't get to be the end of your story. You decide that you're worth more than what someone else tried to make you. You decide to give a damn about yourself the way other people gave a damn about you. And you show up every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. You show up." The woman had cried, thanked her, said that helped. And Dorothy had realized something. Her story wasn't about locked doors and insurance fraud and sons who betrayed mothers. Her story was about what happened when strangers decided another person's suffering was unacceptable. When a firefighter refused to follow protocol because saving a life mattered more than rules. When 150 bikers dropped everything and rode across 3 counties because someone needed protection. When a retired nurse offered her home to a stranger because loneliness shouldn't be faced alone. When people decided to give a damn. That was the story, and it was still being written. Dorothy stood, walked to the kitchen, started preparing tomorrow's cookies. Outside, the wind chimes sang. The sun was setting, gold and orange, beautiful. And Dorothy Sullivan, who'd been locked in a burning house and left to die, who'd survived and testified and rebuilt her life from nothing. Dorothy Sullivan was humming, because sometimes the scariest looking people are the gentlest protectors, because sometimes justice comes on motorcycles, and because sometimes when the world tries to make you invisible, the best revenge is refusing to disappear. Dorothy had refused, and she would keep refusing every single day for the rest of her life.